Okay, so these are the notes for food webs. So you're just going to follow along on the screen and record on your note sheet what I write and anything extra that I may draw in or highlight or anything like that. So a food web shows the relationship between a group of organisms and the food that they eat. So let's take a note about that. It's the relationship between organisms and their food. So in other words, you're looking at or paying attention to who is eating who. So food webs are normally going to be in a picture form of some sort, or they can be in words as well, but they also involve arrows. And the arrows point always from the prey to the predator, from who's being eaten to who's doing the eating. Okay, and what the arrows themselves show is the flow of energy from one organism to the next. Okay, so remember, the arrows are pointing to who is eating, so from who's being eaten to who is eating, from the prey to the predator, but the arrow itself represents the energy that goes from that prey to that predator. So now we have a couple of examples, and it just says, draw an arrow from the prey to the predator in each of the relationships shown below. So we're not going to do all of them, but we'll do a few. So falcons are big birds of prey. They eat small mammals like squirrels, so my arrow would go this way. Humans eat lettuce, so my arrow would go this way. Cougars are like big mountain lions, and they eat other smaller mammals for food, so the arrow would point from the goat to the cougar. Mice are eaten by cats, so you get the idea. So now we're going to start throwing in some vocabulary terms. And some of these are words that you've seen before. So starting with the word autotroph. So I want you to go ahead and underline the word autotroph. And let's talk about what autotrophs can do. When you hear the word autotroph, troph means to feed. And when you think about auto, I want you to think about automatic. So we're automatically feeding ourselves because autotrophs can make their own food. Okay, so the next question asks, what energy conversion happens in photosynthesis? So remember, the process most autotrophs will use to make their own food is photosynthesis. So let's add that word up here. And in photosynthesis, we're just changing the form of energy. So we start off with one kind of energy, and then at the end of photosynthesis, we've we've changed it into a different kind of energy. So photosynthesis gets its initial energy from the sun. So the first kind of energy we're starting off with is light energy. And that light energy is going to get stored in glucose and turns it into chemical energy. So that's the conversion. Photosynthetic organisms that produce food are called producers. So in the food web situation, any organism that can make its own food is referred to as a producer. Now, I can have food webs in every environment you can think of, but the two we're going to focus on are land food webs and water food webs. So another word for land is terrestrial, so I want you to write the word land above terrestrial. So producers that are found in terrestrial ecosystems or terrestrial or land environments are going to be plants. And then you can have two kinds of water environments. We can have aquatic water environments, which could be saltwater or freshwater. And then we can have marine environments, which are only going to be saltwater. But both aquatic and marine should make you think of water. Okay? And while we do have plants that live in some bodies of water, in the deep, deep ocean, we're not going to have plants that are going to start off the food web. So instead, those producers are known as phytoplankton, and we can also have algae in this role. So those are going to be our water environment producers. So if you're not making your own food, you are getting your food by eating something or someone else. And we call those heterotrophs. So what must heterotrophs do? Meaning what must heterotrophs do in order to get food? They have to ingest or eat or absorb or consume. All of these are synonyms, okay? Other organisms for food. That's how they're going to get their energy. They eat something else, okay? And that something else could be plants, but it could also be another animal. Heterotrophic organisms that consume food are called a special name. We call them consumers. If you make your own food, you're a producer, but if you consume other things for food, you are known as a consumer. Okay? So there are three different kinds of heterotrophs or consumers, and it depends on their diet. Okay? So here, let's draw a little arrow, and we're going to write the words heterotrophs / consumers. And then here we're going to say based on diet. So which of these you are just depends on what you eat. So if you are a herbivore, keyword here being herb, which should make you think of plants, you eat plants or vegetation. If you are a carnivore, carne meaning meat, then you eat meat. And if you are an omnivore, you eat both plants and meat. Okay, so we're going to skip this next section because we've already kind of summarized in this area we just got done with, and we're going to move down to decomposers. So once living material dies, once an animal dies or a plant dies, their bodies decay. And the reason their bodies decay is because we have organisms who behave as decomposers. And our classic examples of decomposers, think back to kingdoms, when we talked about this, would be bacteria and fungi. Okay, it's their job to break down the physical bodies of things that have died and recycle them pretty much. So it says, where do you find decomposers in a food web? They will always end the food web. And how can you tell? You can tell because all of the arrows, even if, so let me rephrase that. You can tell because they will be the only group that has all arrows pointing towards them. So even though, like, my rabbit can have an arrow from a rabbit to like a snake, or a rabbit to like an eagle or something, the rabbit and the eagle will also have arrows that point to the decomposers. Okay, so what service do decomposers provide? They help to recycle nutrients. When they break the bodies back down into their starting materials, which are our biomolecules, our proteins, our lipids, our carbs, our nucleic acids, those same building blocks can be used to make other things, other living things. So we're going to say that they recycle nutrients. Okay, then it asks, what do detrivores eat? Detrivores eat decaying matter, and they also eat waste from animals, so feces. Okay, and then it says, what do detrivores help with in an ecosystem? They also help to recycle nutrients. Okay, so now we're on the back, and we are working with the word trough. So trough in biology means nutrition, so food in other words. And when we talk about the levels in a food chain, we talk about trophic levels. So the word trophic comes from the word trough. So in other words, a food web shows us all of the nutrition levels of a bunch of organisms that live close to each other and eat each other for food, pretty much. Excuse me. What source of energy is not considered a trophic level? So the initial source, which always starts off as sun, is not going to be considered a trophic level. Remember, the sun gives us light energy. Trophic levels contain what form of energy? Chemical energy, because we're talking about food. Once we are talking about food, we are talking about chemical energy. Okay, so let's look at an example of a very simple food chain that's shown in this picture. So it starts off with the sun. That's our initial source of energy. And then we have the grass, we have an insect, we have a fish, and we have a bird. So what they want you to do is label all the different parts of this food chain. So you're going to put a P over the producer, a 1 for the primary consumer, meaning the first person to eat. Secondary consumer is your second person to eat. Tertiary is your third person. Quaternary will be your fourth person. Not everyone may be represented, so we'll see. Okay, so starting with our producer. Our producer is going to be the grass, so we put a P here. The first thing eating something is the insect, so that is our primary consumer, so we put a 1. The second thing eating something is our secondary consumer, that would be your fish. And then the third thing to eat something would be your bird, so that one gets a 3. Because we don't have anything higher than a bird, we don't have a number 4 in this particular food chain. Okay, so now that we've labeled everything, we move on to the next picture, and it says, number the food web shown to the right. So just like we're using the exact same numbers, they want you to number everything. So starting with my producer, remember my producer is the thing that makes its own food. So that would be my grass. Now, because this is a web is going to be like multiple chains, okay? So don't be surprised if you can have 2 or more arrows going off of the same organism. So from my grass is eaten by my cricket, but grass is also eaten by my mouse. So my cricket is a primary consumer, and my mouse is also a primary consumer. But note that my cricket can be eaten by my mouse as well. So the mouse can eat the grass, but the mouse can also eat the cricket, which makes the mouse also a secondary consumer. Now my cricket is eaten by a lizard. It can also be eaten by a snake, so both of those would be secondary consumers. My snake is eaten by a hawk. The hawk is a tertiary consumer. And just to make it a little bit more interesting, let's add in an eagle. Hold on one second. Okay, so if the hawk is eaten by the eagle becomes my quaternary consumer. We just didn't have one in the other one, so I wanted to make sure you could see what that looks like. Okay, so it says, which organism in the food web is the producer? That would be the grass. Which animals are competing over the crickets? So in other words, who all are eating crickets? Well, there are three things eating crickets. Your mouse, your lizard, and your snake all eat crickets. That means they're all competing for the crickets. Which animal is your omnivore? Remember, my omnivore is going to be able to eat plants as well as meat. So let's see, that would be my mouse, because my mouse can eat grass, but my mouse can also eat the cricket. Where would the grass get its energy from? So it's not shown in the food web, but the grass would get its energy from the sun. Which animal is both a primary and secondary consumer? Again, that's my mouse because it has a 1 and a 2 on it. It's eating the grass, which makes it a primary consumer, but it also eats the cricket, which makes it a secondary consumer. Okay, what do the arrows show? Remember, the arrows show the flow of energy. And then it says, which animal is a tertiary consumer? That would be my hawk. And then if we asked which animal was a quaternary consumer, that would be your eagle. All right, and that's that for food web notes. I will see you guys soon. Bye.